Good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. Those of you here in the chamber with us and those watching at home on ACTV or online, we appreciate you caring enough and being interested in what we're doing. If any of you here tonight have a cell phone or any other electronic device, if you would please turn it off to silent, we'd appreciate it. If you'd like an agenda, they're on the table just to the right outside the doors here, and those watching remotely can get an agenda from Athens-Clarke There'll be two opportunities for citizens' input tonight: the consent agenda, which are items 1 through 7, and new business items 8 through 17. We don't take public input on the staff reports from the Planning Commission at our agenda-setting meetings. The public hearing on these items will be conducted at the March 7th business meeting. Rules of the Commission allow citizens 3 minutes for comment. A timer on Ms. Spratlin's desk here will turn yellow at 2.5 minutes, so please have your comments finished before the light turns red at 3 minutes. We ask that you refrain from demonstrating, including applause during our meetings. If you brought a handout, if you'll give them to Mr. Berryman, he'll make sure that we get them. So now we'll go into our meeting. If any citizen would like to speak to anything on our consent agenda, this would be the time to come to the podium, give us your name, address, and which item you're speaking to. And that's items 1 through 7.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. Tim Denson, 290 Midway Road. Just speaking briefly to item number 1, the SPLOST 2018 program. I'm very excited about this. Athens for Everyone's very excited about this moving forward. The one thing I would like to see a little more is more of a healthy discussion on if operations funding can be included in this. I know up till now the reading of the legislation is leaning towards no, but I would hope that we can have more of a healthy discussion on that and maybe have the Commission push a little bit more further into looking if operations funding can be used, because right now it's limited to just the 3% of the current funding. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Denson. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Would any commissioner like to take something off for discussion? Mr. Harrod, then Mr. Neesmith. Anybody over here? Gertz.
Number 1, and I suspect Commissioner Neesmith is going to say the same thing.
I suspect you're right.
I was going to say.
Mr.
Number
Gertz.
4 for just a very brief comment.
Okay. And I was going to ask about number 1, too. So we'll go back to Mr. Harrod and discuss number 1, and then we'll decide whether to leave it on or not.
I think based on our work session last week, several of us wanted to perhaps tweak the description of the general statement of purpose to specifically mention a little bit more about some economic development related activities, and Commissioner Neesmith and myself had talked about perhaps crafting some language that would do that. So I think we'd probably like to leave this off the consent agenda.
Okay.
Anything I say will be redundant.
Mr. Gertz, you want to say anything about that? No, yours was a different item. I'm sorry. Well,
It was, but I'll briefly address. I know there was a question about operational funding as it relates to SPLOST. It's my understanding that county staff is pursuing the question kind of as interpretation of the existing code and also interacting with our local delegation to see if there could be some clarifying language in this General Assembly session.
And I'll mention one thing in that on item 1 that I would like to see, and it's in this special consideration should be given to implementation of projects. It's on it's on my page 5, 2 of 2. I'm not sure how y'all are looking at it, but it's where we had, when it was first assigned, it said catching up on funding for pavement maintenance programs, and catching up was struck out, and it's just funding of pavement maintenance program. I'd like to see that provide adequate pavement maintenance funding for paving maintenance, because I think that's going to be one of the more important things to more of our citizens in the county, to make sure that we take care of our maintenance, paving maintenance. So I'd like to see that changed. Okay, Mr. Kurtz, what did you want? We'll leave this one off, Gene. And what did you want?
I just very briefly want to say thank you, staff, for your attention to detail on item number 4, where there's kind of a change in location for the crosswalk on North Avenue versus the initial anticipation, but I like the way the graphic looks, and I think given the length between signalized intersections on North Avenue, that's really going to enhance safety there.
You're happy they stay on consent?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else before we move off of consent? Okay, this is the time that anyone that's here with us tonight would speak to items 8 through 17. And again, give us your name and address and which item you're speaking to.
Tyler Dewey, 1075 West Broad Street. I'm going to speak on item 14. Part of the reason I'm speaking tonight is because I will be in Washington, D.C. for the National Bike Summit on March 7th, so I won't be able to speak at the voting meeting. So I did want to give some public comments about the consultant selection for the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, which I think Jim Thompson wrote an article about it maybe a week ago or recently, and so I think you know where we stand on it. We've been part of the process. We are very excited for what's happening. Just want to thank staff, Drew and Blaine, they've been really great partners in crafting what I think has been an excellent scope of service for a consultant, and I think all the finalists were really fantastic, and I think we're really set up well going forward. And I was just thinking the timing worked out correctly. So I was actually driving today. I do drive occasionally. So I was driving on Atlanta Highway, West Broad Street. I was coming up back towards Alps Road up from the river, and I saw one of our clients. We give out bikes to people who can't afford a car, need a way to get to work. So I saw one of our clients who can't drive because he can't afford a car yet. He's getting there, and he was just able to buy pretty much a new bike, so hopefully he'll be able to buy a car soon. But without a car, he has to ride his bike to work, wherever that work may be. And today it was somewhere that forced him to ride up West Atlanta Highway, 6-lane road. There's no sidewalk, but that doesn't matter because you can't legally ride your bike on the sidewalk. So seeing him ride up in traffic, just so happened, luckily, there's somebody on a scooter who was sort of shielding him from passing cars because the scooter was going about the same speed he was. But seeing him riding up that road, I just thought about how, after 15 years of our former bicycle plan, the opportunity and what a great opportunity it is to have a new plan for the county. And I think, the consultant certainly knows these issues a lot better than I do. And to have that consultant come in and talk to us and give us a plan for how we can accommodate all our roads so that gentlemen like the one I saw today can get around town without having to rely on an automobile, take that money, save it, put it to get in an apartment, a better apartment, putting it in the savings account is really wonderful and really will support a lot of our citizens, not just the ones who like to put on Lycra and ride on the weekends. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey.
Hi, my name's Ellen Walker. I live at 580 Belvoir Heights in Normaltown. And I'm here on behalf of Timmy Conley. He couldn't be here tonight, but he wanted me to read a letter regarding issue 16, the special event permit process. So I'm just going to read what he gave to me. Honorable Mayor and Commission, I just wish to quickly comment on the possible restructuring of special event requirements in Athens-Clarke County. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on the subject. As director of the Wild Rumpus Parade and Spectacle, now in its 9th year, I feel it's essential to share my views on special events in our city. Number one, I don't think I am unique in the fact that the event I organize is almost financially unsustainable as it is. I spend a solid 6 months of my year making the rumpus happen, and over the course of the 9 years I have done it, I have given more money to local charities than I have taken for myself. Long story short, it's a ton of work and gives a lot to the community and is barely manageable for the person making it happen. That being said, of course, we all want events in downtown Athens to be safe and profitable for the city. For example, for 2016's Wild Rumpus, I worked with Lieutenant Epps exhaustively on a comprehensive traffic plan that made sure every angle and possible problem was considered. I let him know that I was happy to accommodate whatever extra off-duty staff he needed to feel comfortable about the running of the night. He requested a big increase in staffing from our 2015 levels, and I made it very clear it was no problem paying the extra to have things go smoothly. Our event went very smoothly. So you can see safety is already a concern for me, and I'm personally very open to partnering with city officials to make it happen right. For the record, it seems logical to me to look at each event individually to determine needs such as police staffing and have the event pay for just what it needs. The newly suggested tiered levels of insurance requirements is something I can understand, but after studying the table, I'm not sure my own event, the Wild Rumpus, fits cleanly into one particular risk category. The main differences between medium and high-risk events are 1, crowd numbers, and 2, amount or size of equipment setup. As it stands with the current table, there is little to separate the Wild Rumpus, a 3-hour alcohol-free parade and party with moderate street closure, from an event like Athfest, which is 3 days long and serves alcohol. I do not think that is appropriate. Nothing against Athfest. I love Athfest. But it is my estimation that there are other events that will also fall through the cracks of these requirement tiers. Insurance and off-duty police are 2 of the Rumpus's highest cost expenses. I'm happy to work hard and cover the costs so that safety is never an issue with the Rumpus. If it is deemed that more of these are required, I will have to work harder, which will be difficult. With the Rumpus, we've been fortunate to receive CEP grant money from AADDA and an arts grant from AAC, but I will be honest, it's nowhere near what is needed to move the event forward as it grows. Anything the city can do to allay event costs or creatively find other ways of financially supporting special events would be more than helpful. It's needed. One Athens bar owner commented to me that Wild Rumpus 2016 was the biggest night of sales his bar has ever had, topping the previous record set by a Wild Rumpus night in 2015. His story is not unique, and it underscores the financial value of special events that sits squarely behind all the color, fun, and creativity they bring to our city. I'm asking your help as mayor and commission to keep my own story in mind as you think about making changes to special event requirements. I hope you'll strive to help special events survive and thrive. Thank you.
I was trying to let you finish. Yeah. Anyone else?
Good evening. Mark Beechuk, 195 Pineview Drive, Athens 30606. I'm currently the chair of the Athens Cultural Affairs Commission, and I'm speaking about item 15, the Public Art Master Plan. Just wanted to let you guys know how exciting of a process it's been for us. I really appreciate the time everyone took at the work session where Todd Bressi was able to present the master plan. Just wanted to mention 2 points as we go forward, and hope to have a lot of support here for the Mayor and Commission vote. We have a couple projects already in the works for master plan adoption that are part of the master plan process. One would be the extension of the art shelter program through our transit department. We've begun discussions with Butch McDuffie about that and are looking forward to hit the ground running when adoption comes forward. The second is about the mural program that Todd has put into the plan for Athens. And while we began working on that, we're also seeking approval through the manager's office to apply for an Artworks grant that would involve matching funds from our budget as well as from the NEA to put a mural on the non-historic side of the Morton Theater. These next steps are an important part for us to begin utilizing task forces, which are going to help out involving citizens in with the commission and have even better contact with our community. We've had a little bit of questioning about funding, and the master plan does talk about funding a professional staff position down the road, but we want to let everyone know that those steps are just steps in the process, that's not something we're asking you to adopt from day one. We think that it's important that you guys join us along the ride as our growth in public art throughout the county is taking place. Part of that staffing would be one of our toughest tasks, which is staying in constant contact with staff and with the departments and user groups as we go through the project management phases. A staffing appointment would help us have that constant contact as well as the backing of an administrator or a director that would be behind that person. It would allow art to be holistically brought into the design process throughout all the projects and be incorporated into many components throughout the process and not just a piece at the end of the line. So I thank you very much for your consideration. Really hoping for a positive vote on the Public Art Master Plan. And if the Commission can clarify anything further for the Mayor and Commission, we'd be happy to do that. Please don't hesitate to contact me or our Commission members.
Thank you, Mr. Beechuk. Anyone else want to speak to any of these items on the new business? Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. And the first one is item number 8. Would anyone like to discuss that, or where you want to go with it? Andy?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So obviously this item number 8 is related to item number 9. And it came about actually during our discussions about events downtown, and we had some staff members from Leisure Services that came to us to talk a little bit about some things here, there, and everywhere. But in the course of that conversation, the issue of the scholarship program came up, and so we as a committee, as Government Operations Committee, felt that that was something that really we wanted the whole commission to be able to discuss. So this is a long way of saying that the report is saying pass out with no action.
Okay. Pass out number 8 or number 9?
Number 8.
Number 8 with no action. Okay. Any objections?
Placed on consent if that.
Sure.
Put it on consent, Gene, that'd be fine. Item number 9, do you want to speak to that, Andy, or?
Certainly. So as we saw at the work session, Leisure Services had some issues with the way in which our scholarship program had been operating over the past few years, and had come with some recommended changes to make the process of applying for scholarships a little bit easier and more manageable, but also to ensure that there is a greater availability of some scholarships to children in the community, because apparently some had been assigned but were not being taken up.
Thank you. Anybody? Ms. Lincoln and Mr. Gertz.
I have some mixed feelings about eliminating the 100% scholarships, but I totally understand the whole no-show problem and how, some kids are missing out on the opportunity to participate in these programs because their spots are being taken up by kids who actually don't show up. But I do hope that Leisure Services will provide some kind of sponsorship or gift certificate program, so somehow, folks who maybe can't afford that discounted rate could find other opportunities to make up that difference. And, we did bring this up in the Government Operations Committee meeting and in some of the work sessions, too. So I look forward to seeing some kind of program like that come forward so that we can give those folks who are really in dire need and have a really difficult time even making that final 25% can seek out some other opportunities to cover those fees.
Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The management of the scholarship program has obviously presented a challenge, just in the sense that it's a relatively expensive piece of Leisure Services program budget. But what I think the department did a great job of is looking at some peer communities and asking a couple of questions. I mean, one being, how do we on an individual user basis compare to those communities? And then in aggregate, how do we compare? And I think on both counts, this proposed policy would stack up very kindly against any community that we looked at, in the sense that you can get up to a 75% scholarship, you can get up to $400 annually per individual child user, and that there's no cap on the overall budget towards scholarships like some communities have. So I'm going to support this item. The one additional thing that I would say is that any corporate donations or in-kind contributions that could fund some of these programs would obviously be beneficial to the department, to Leisure Services, and certainly should be sought.
Anyone else? Mr.
Yeah, I agree with Kelly, and this is what I wanted to talk about, was that I support this 25% or 75% scholarship limit, but it would encourage the private sector, both profits and for-profits and nonprofits, to consider contributing to these scholarships, so that kid who is getting a 75% scholarship can take that next 25% from a private source and attend the camp. I think that would be a wonderful program, and everybody would benefit from it.
Thank you.
I would like to see us move this to consent, by the way.
Okay. Mr. Sims.
When we think about this, the only real concern I have about it is when we have a family that has 4 or 5 children. It gets to be an expensive undertaking then. And I think that we need to be encouraging private sector to really try to help step into that particular case. But, maybe, we might need to actually even think about the possibility of discounting if there is multiple children. It might be another avenue that we might need to look at in terms of this, because, like I said, there are some people, some families that have 4 and 5 children that are in our camps. And it does get to be an expensive undertaking when you've got that many and you're losing that 25%.
Okay. Y'all want this to go on consent? Any problem? Okay. So item number 10 is our Whit Davis Road parking restriction. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure. Well, the one thing that wasn't mentioned in the agenda report that would be worthwhile to at least note is that there was a pretty bad accident. Luckily, no one was hurt, but there was some damage from a truck and trailer that a car came out, couldn't see, and got hit, and that's sort of what spurred this on. So I think it's important. We were out there Friday for the Arbor Day, and a few people did get ticketed. And, of course, I know the next agenda item is dealing with the parking out there, but it's that we don't need someone getting hit, an individual, trying to cross the road or trying to get into their car on the side of the road. So I certainly in support of this. So I'd like to see it go on consent.
Okay. And I had some correspondence from somebody about this, asking us to be generous or generous-hearted at it. But there had been a number of warnings given to people for parking on the side of the street. The signs are very visible, and as you said, it was a very dangerous situation. That's when our police departments recommended it, and we are going to, in the next item, try to address the parking out there. We're probably victims of our own success out there with the Wild Park. Andy?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would wholeheartedly agree with what Commissioner Dickerson just mentioned. I did have an email, though, 2 or 3 days ago from an individual in the Meadow Creek subdivision. And they apparently, I haven't been out there and seen it myself, but apparently they are having some issues now because of what's going on with regards to parking at the park. They are having an issue now with people parking on the other side of the road and making it difficult to get in and out of that subdivision. I did send a work order into Gene, and I'm assuming that's been forwarded on, but it may be the case, and I don't want to get this too confused with this particular issue, but it may be the case that we may need to have some yellow striping or something out there as well at some point. But I'll wait for the report to come back from our traffic department.
Sharon, did you say you want that on consent?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, well, item number 11 is the one where we're going to be looking at parking lot expansion out there at the Wild Park. So do you want to address that one for us, Ms. Dickerson?
Yeah, I actually had one more question for the manager that I didn't ask. The $440,000 that's proposed for the parking lot, does that include the deconstruction cost of the playground as well, or just the cost of the parking lot?
I'm pretty sure that's the turnkey cost.
Okay. The only other thing I mentioned to Manager Williams was a concern when I looked at the schematic. There are some trees that were planted out there along the north border of the playground fence area that were planted 15 years ago. They're pretty mature trees, and they were planted by the same people who helped pay. I mean, there were fundraisers. We helped fund one of them as well. But there's some trees in there. I know there's trees in the schematic, and I just asked that if we could, at all possible, that line of trees, if we could work the parking around it. We're going to put trees in the parking lot if there's a way to work it out so we don't lose those trees, because they are very mature trees. They provide a lot of shade, and anybody parking in there will benefit from that as well. So if we could just try to make sure we work around that as best as possible so we don't lose those trees, that would be great.
And I have a question, Mr. What is the timing on finishing this parking? I glanced through and didn't see it quickly, but it's probably there.
Yes, it is. And I think we were looking at by year's end is what we're looking at.
Good. Yeah, I just want to have that in this meeting so the public would know that when to expect it. So, okay, you want that one on consent?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Neesmith.
That's quite right. I have a question for the manager.
Sure.
Is there money available like there was for this for improvements in other parks?
Well, yes. I mean, that SPLOST line item is for all parks. And, I think it was 2 cycles ago, y'all approved the next tranche of projects. This one got moved up because of the relative urgency of the parking situation. But y'all approved the concepts for which this money is spent.
So even on a new project that's fairly small, under 30 grand, we really would have to go through that process to get it on here.
Yeah, the mayor, all those projects for SPLOST would, first go to the oversight committee, then come to you for concept approval, and then we go on from there.
Thank you.
And let me say something too. I need to correct something I said. The deconstruction budget is separate from this 440, but it's in the original project budget.
Okay, that's fine.
It was always, and that's the reason there was a delay for the general public to know, is that, there was a feeling that we want to use the old park as long as we can until it wore itself out. But obviously the success of the new one has changed our priority.
Okay. Item number 12, Small Community Air Service Development Grant. Anyone want to speak to that, or what do you want to do with this one?
Mayor, I will.
Yes.
So this is a grant that's going to help us fund. Right now, we have a airport authority that is basically being staffed by citizen volunteers. And while we have very educated people on there that know about the air service, we do need some assistance. And so this will help provide some funding to help support that effort to look for a scheduled air service, as well as associated costs with that. So not just the cost of helping put together the grant, but also the trying to solicit an air service development company to come in. So, and just so you know, there is a max. We're asking for $750,000, and most of the grants are right around $500,000 that have been given. We wanted to go for more, but we felt like we might be pushing it. We are a really good candidate for this, and there are a couple other airports that I won't be able to tell you off the top of my head. They're in Georgia that got these grants, and then we've spoken with them. But they felt like if we asked for more than that, we might not get it. So we don't want to push our luck. But there is a $250,000 max allowed for just the marketing portion of it. So we can't ask for more than that for marketing, and the other $500,000 would be focused on either offsetting the cost of tickets or percentage of ground contract work and that kind of thing. So,
anyone else want to speak to this one? Y'all want this one on consent?
Sure.
I would.
Okay. We may only have one vote next meeting. Okay. Item number 13 is Runway 9-27 Rehab Project, and this is for the design. And that's in your district too, Ms.
Well, it's actually in his district,
I'm
but
sorry,
I've been
Mr.
involved
Sanders.
in
But
it.
she's been involved in it as much as I have. And really, again, it's a simple grant, and hopefully, we do have to do a match of 5%, but 90% of it is done through the FAA, so I think that's a good deal. Anytime you get 90 and just pay 5, we'll take it.
I would like to add, Mayor, that the runway's in need of rehab all the way to the base, basically. Mm-hmm. There will be some disruption if we get a scheduled air service, and I don't want to lie to anybody, it's going to be tricky. But we really can't not go after this as part of our capital improvement plan, which is part of the master plan for the airport. The one thing I will ask, and I don't know that it's necessary to, quote, ask this, but it's probably worthwhile to at least mention that under the current FAA design standards for the larger aircraft that are currently landing, we need 150-foot width, and we don't have that right now. So my request is when we design this, we work with engineers to make sure that the runway is designed at what is preferable and not what they're getting now. Because I believe 10 or 15 years ago when we did all this, there was a request for that, and they're managing it. It's fine, but now that since we're looking at going, we're getting bigger airlines in there, or airplanes in there, we might as well make sure when we're designing it, we may design it as they would prefer to have it. So, and I doubt it costs that much more to design it 150 versus it will cost more to pave it, but that's also a 90% mat or 90% funding from the federal, 5 from state, 5 from local. So, okay.
Consent?
Yes, please.
Okay. Item number 14 is the consultant selection for the bike and PED master plan. Would anyone like to address that, or Mr. Kurtz?
Just want to first thank the mayor for forming this committee in the first place and getting a lot of great citizens, including Mr. Dewey, who's in the audience tonight, gathered to put this plan together. I think as he mentioned, this is really going to yield dividends in terms of integrating bike and pedestrian needs into our overall transportation system, and well worth the cost for its long-term benefits for the community.
Okay. Ms. Link?
I'll kind of echo those comments. I'm really looking forward to this plan. We definitely are a community that's growing, and if we want to grow wisely and accommodate all that growth, we're going to have to encourage people to use alternative means of transportation and get them out of their cars. And we're a pretty small community. It's not hard to walk and bike around, providing it's made safe. And there are a lot of towns our size and even smaller that are really buying into, these whole trail systems and protected bike lanes, and they're reaping the economic benefits of them, and I'm really looking forward to seeing, these plans put into action. We're making a lot of plans these days, and let's just commit ourselves to actually implementing them in the future.
I think we all are, and I sure hope those T-SPLOST dollars get approved and go far enough. So, okay, y'all want to put this on consent?
Consent.
Okay. Athens Public Art Master Plan. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Bell.
Madam Mayor, you asked me to serve on that committee when it was initiated. There were a lot of meetings I had to miss because of conflicts with my other responsibilities with the commission. But it was wonderful to see the energy and the love for this community and the love of art, and I appreciate all the work they've done. There's still a bunch ahead, but we'll get it done. Y'all will get it done. But thank you, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of what they have done. Looking forward to it.
Ms. Link.
I just want to thank the Cultural Affairs Commission and Mr. Bressi for pulling this off. I know it was a big job. I sat on the Cultural Affairs Commission for a couple of years in its early years, and they do a tremendous amount of work. And, we mentioned the staff person, the hope that someday they can get a staff person, and I do hope that we can find the funding to have a dedicated staff person, even just a part-time staff person, because it is very important that these projects get integrated into the planning process from the very beginning. If we want a really impactful public art program, we really need to get these folks in on the very, very front end. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing us dedicate some more resources to this commission in the future.
Anybody else?
Consent.
I'd like to place it on the consent agenda.
Well, I would like to make a proposal, because all it says is Athens Public Art Master Plan. I'd like to add to that, except Athens Public Art Master Plan. Okay?
The title.
Okay. And put it on consent agenda. Item number 6. I'm sorry, was there a question? No, ma'am. Item number 16, the government operations review of special events permit process. Is that you, Mr. Gertz? I mean, Mr. Herod?
It's not Mr. Gertz.
Well, you look so much alike, except one of you has whiskers. Yeah, so.
Right direction, wrong name. So this is the report from the Government Operations Committee. As the report suggests, or details rather, we spent quite a bit of time over the last 6 months or so discussing the special events permitting process for downtown. We had a lot of different entities come and talk with us, from our own staff to people that run events downtown to people that own property downtown to others. And basically what we were trying to do was to balance, on the one hand, improving or making it easier to have events downtown, because downtown's obviously important for our local economy. So balancing that need on the one hand with the need on the other to ensure public safety. And so as a way to try and balance those two, this is what we came up with. No plan is perfect, but this is where we're at.
Well, when we think of something else, I'll put it back in committee and let you work on it some more.
That's.
I'd be okay if you wanted to put it back in committee.
Are you? You're probably not on that committee, are you?
No, I'm on the committee.
Unfortunately, he is.
Oh, okay.
They didn't do what I asked, but.
Mr. Gertz. Yeah, and then, I'm sorry, Gertz first and then Link.
Sure. This is obviously an agenda item related to code text, not an agenda item related to funding. But there has been some conversation around sort of a corresponding funding mechanism that would ensure that there are public funds available for insurance purposes. You know, obviously in the ideal, these things come together at one time. But I wonder if either the mayor or Commissioner Hamby could speak a little bit to the prospect of public funding for downtown event insurance purposes.
Well, this has basically just been a conversation between the two of us. That there's been some request of additional funds for ADDA for the program for special events. I would like for us to have a mechanism by which we can target those funds to providing the insurance coverage for these events, which seems to be the most difficult obstacle to overcome for the planners of the events. But it's just in the talking stage right now. You know, it's not even developed yet, but that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear the conversation's underway. I'd definitely be most comfortable with this, knowing that conversation's moving forward. So I don't know if Commissioner Hamby wants to add something to that.
I would just add it's probably going to be a budget discussion and that the mayor and commission will have to take up when we start talking about the budget from that standpoint. So, and I'm like you, Commissioner Gertz, and everybody else behind the rail, and the mayor included. You know, we recognize the value that special events bring to our community. We recognize how they bring people together and introduce people to people that live in this community, and I think that's a good thing, and we want to make sure that continues to happen. And certainly, and one of the position that I was trying to argue for in the Government Ops Committee that wasn't as convincing as I was hope I would be, but you know, certainly these are events that are important to the community. But if we're adding the additional requirements on the event, then I think it's incumbent upon us to see what we can do to help it with that situation. So,
Ms. Nisbet, that's my hand, but I need to get back to Ms. Link first.
Is he going first? Okay. I have a hard time supporting this without that funding being already in place. You know, I felt like the whole reason we were even discussing this was to come up with a way to make it easier for some of our local nonprofits and to throw these special events. And it seems like we've just made it more difficult. We've added some insurance requirements that are not required by other cities. We've added this pretty stringent umbrella insurance requirement. And I'm looking at this handout, which hopefully management can send this chart to the rest of the commission. Those of us on the committee got to see it, but we looked at Augusta, Decatur, Atlanta, Asheville, and Greenville to see if they had that umbrella insurance requirement, and none of them do, or they didn't respond. So I'm really questioning that requirement, and from what I understand, this is going to increase AthFest's insurance costs fivefold, and they already have their budget set for this year. So if we implement this year, they may not have the resources to even pay for it and throw that event. So I have some serious concerns about this whole thing, and I feel like if we're going to implement this, we should delay it at least till next year, so these events that are regularly scheduled events can set their budgets to accommodate that. I mean, most of these events are operating on a shoestring or at a loss as it is. And also to, make sure that we have that other additional public funding to cover these insurance rates. And I mean, I just don't understand how these other cities get away without this very large umbrella insurance requirement. I'm talking like $10 million for these events that are considered high risk, and $5 million for these medium risk events. I really question, what makes Athens so different from any of these other cities that we would require such onerous insurance. I'm really concerned that these events might not happen because of those requirements. And I mean, part of our problem is we do not have a downtown public space. A lot of these other communities have a dedicated town square, or at least a particular part of town where it's very easy to shut off streets and have it function as a town square. And as we look at our health and safety study, I hope that that's something that we can talk more about, is creating that downtown public space where it is much easier and much safer to shut off our streets and have these events kind of on the fly almost.
Mr. Neesmith and Mr. Herod.
I have a question about whether or not this applies to the rental of a park space, such as the farmers market. Because
this applies to anything that needs a special event permit.
Okay, so it wouldn't apply to the Athens farmers market because they're just renting space from.
I'm not familiar with what leisure services requires of users of the park, but we can find that out.
Well, they require insurance, $1 million, $2 million. But this is different. But I do wonder about another thing, and that is this difference between low risk and medium risk. In low risk, it's no alcohol sale, no sales of food and beverages, no alcohol service. And then it has a crowd participant size of 500. But if you go under 500, you go to medium risk, even though you don't have the sale of alcohol and food. And I wonder what the participant size means. Is that at any one time, or is that throughout the day? I think that needs to be a distinction. If I have a crowd of 500, that's different from when I have a crowd of 5,000 at one time. I think that's very unclear.
Mr. Harry, did you want to speak to this?
I was just going to say, as I said in my previous comments, I mean, this is not a perfect document, but I do want to point out that all 5 members of the Government Operations Committee did vote to support this. So I'm a little bit surprised now to hear some of the comments coming from one of my colleagues about all of the problems with it.
Well, one of the things I'll point out, if y'all don't mind, because I sat in on that last committee meeting, and there's more in this than just the insurance. There's another provision that's going to be helpful to the special events, that they will no longer have to pay for parking meter fees for those on-street meters that they tie up, which is a significant savings for a number of them. And as I recall the discussion in the committee, and we don't have a public square to put it in that's a safer place, it's a matter of how much public risk are we willing to take on, and that's the whole question. It's not the risk for the producers of these, it's the risk for the community, and how much risk is our communities willing to take on in order to have these. So, Mr. Hamby.
Sure. And I'd just like to add just a couple more items that I did vote for this out of committee reluctantly for that standpoint. I thought I made it. I thank Commissioner Harrod and Commissioner Bell, and understand I was trying to get it out of committee to the full commission. So at any rate, the point I wanted to also make as far as helping with some of the costs is one of the things that I do agree with that the committee did approve is that special events will not be charged for lost revenue from on-street parking meters, which I think would be significant for Athfest as well as Twilight from that standpoint. But again, I would like for us to explore the funding options for that extra insurance that's being required from the government on the part of these special events.
Ms. Bell.
I think I'm in the doghouse between him and him on our position from this committee. I was the commissioner on the committee that recommended that we increase for the insurance. My statement was that liability is one of the biggest words in the English language, and when we look at the incidences that have happened in other cities and the cost and the protection, that's why I feel like this is very important for us to look full scale at and look at it from the reality of what it can mean if something tragic does happen.
Mr. Gertz, and then Ms. No.
I just had a general question. I'm just wondering, is a food truck festival, would that be considered a special event or under the vendor ordinance?
It's on the street.
It would be what?
It's on the street, it's a special event.
So it would be a special event? But is that, with the, I guess my question is, does that hold true to the definition you guys have? Doesn't seem like it would fit. It says it has to be provide a substantial public and community benefit.
The food truck festival is different from the food truck
I'm
ordinance,
just curious. I mean, I just wonder if that is a substantial, because the people who have storefronts downtown probably wouldn't feel that way. I mean, that's my only comment. I mean,
are you asking about the food truck festival or
no, a food truck festival like
festival.
we've had before?
Yeah.
The answer to your question is yes, it does provide a substantial public benefit.
Mr. Gertz.
Just hearing some of the conversation, and I'm not suggesting this definitively, but I wonder if sort of a rational approach is to put this item on hold pending budget discussions.
Good idea.
Okay, do we have any special events coming up that are going to be affected by this in the meantime?
I'm assuming Athfest probably.
Twilight. Yeah, Twilight's coming up, yeah.
And Twilight.
Yeah.
The two bigger ones.
Potentially implement beginning next fiscal year. That would be after Twilight and Athfest.
I think that's a good idea.
Well, could we, well, this is a suggestion, could we implement the parking part without the insurance? Mr. Chair, you got any thoughts?
No. I mean, I think if you're going to implement it, you need to implement it whole cloth. So if we're going to hold it, I think we need to carry on under our current, how we do things currently until we do implement it, rather than picking and choosing bits here and there and everywhere.
I mean, I feel
But
like
I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other.
I feel like a rational compromise is to, I mean, especially considering that these folks have already set their budgets for the year, and then these events are already well underway in the planning process. You know, we could give them the benefit of the reduced parking without the onerous regulations of the increased insurance amount, just to get through that fiscal year budget planning. I mean, I think that's kind of a kind of tiered implementation, approach.
Mike.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I just, we struggled with this quite a bit in a few months, and certainly staff did a really good job in presenting us with the information. And it was a good discussion. And of course, I was true to form in expressing my opinion, whether good or bad, I guess. But at any rate, I just wanted to remind everybody why this came to the committee. And it was, we certainly had the fireworks event, which is a different beast in and of itself as far as risk associated with that. But beyond that, even before the fireworks, several of us were hearing comments about the cost of events for downtown and some of the requirements that are being placed on some of the events. And so the mayor sent it to the committee for us to look at that. And, I was hoping it would go to committee for us to look at ways to reduce the cost for some of the events. And instead, we're looking at some other options there. And I would like for us, if there is a way to figure out to manage that parking for these events that generate, the Twilight's 30,000 people downtown, and AthFest is almost about the same, I believe, to help them continue to go and provide this service for our community as people come enjoy these events. So if there's a way to do that, it certainly would be nice to put the insurance requirements on hold until the budget discussions and improve the recommendations, all the other recommendations that came out of government ops. Because certainly the only one we'd put on hold would be recommendation A, and approve B and C. At any rate, just an idea.
Okay, I'll let y'all figure it out between now and our voting meeting.
Leave it on discussion, please.
Okay.
Yep.
Item number 17 is our Legislative Review Committee of Ordinance Adjustments related to overgrown lots. Mr. Gertz.
Be happy to talk a little bit about this. This went through, well, I'd be happy to begin the conversation about it. It began when I was on LRC, so I'll provide the prologue, and then I think the meat of the conversation can go to Commissioner Neesmith as current chair.
Well, he was. Oh, that's right. You're no longer the committee chair. I'm sorry. We're in a different year. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Gertz.
It's all right. We'll do the Beastie Boys routine.
Yeah. Y'all can tag team each other. Yeah.
This came to LRC last year.
Yeah, you were there when it came to the committee.
That's right, because there'd been a lot of conversation around how to do the most credible job that we can, ensuring that homeowners, property owners, and our enforcement staff can make sure that everybody's on the same page around what an overgrown lot is. The challenge long-term as this approach to the committee is that sometimes beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and sometimes overgrown lots are in the eye of the beholder as well. And so there were probably 4 meetings at which this item was on the agenda, and lots of different communities that were examined, the International Building Code text that was examined, and then by holiday time, end of calendar 16, something close to this came to LRC, and I'll now let Commissioner Neesmith pick up from there.
And I apologize, Commissioner Neesmith.
Commissioner Gertz has done a fine job.
Between the two of y'all will probably do a credible job.
Yes. And so my first meeting was January the 19th, where the ordinance, draft ordinance was brought to us by staff as a result of the work that the committee had done. And that ordinance, if you don't mind me going on a bit, includes the definition of managed natural landscapes, definition of weeds and turf grasses, height restrictions for turf grasses and weeds, height restrictions in the AR zones, vegetative control adjacent to structures, and the notice and citation procedures. The committee unanimously voted to forward the ordinance to the mayor and commission. And so there's a set of definitions that are important. And I think this is an opportunity to educate the public a bit about this, because it could affect some folks. A managed natural landscape is a landscape that's designed intentionally and maintained cultivation of native and non-native grasses, sedges, wildflowers, etc., for the purposes of attracting wildlife, preventing soil loss, enrichment of soil fertility, pest control, government programs, education studies, food production, establishment of restoration of native plants. So that's important because the managed natural landscapes is an exception to this ordinance in terms of plant height and so forth. Turf grass means, and this is very specific, it includes fescue, Bermuda, ryegrass, centipede, bluegrass, zoysia, or blends thereof, and to be maintained at a height of no more than 10 inches. Now, some of us debated about, have they ever seen zoysia, bluegrass, centipede over 10 inches, and the answer was no one had, but we'll go with this for now. So at least then the weeds in those can't be more than 10 inches. And the weeds means any and all vegetation, including but not limited to honeysuckle, kudzu, jimson, burdock, ragweed, thistle, cocklebur, dandelion, crabgrass, or Johnson grass that is not managed or maintained by the owner or person in possession of the property. Height restrictions is that the lot or lands must be kept free from weeds and turf grasses over 10 inches in height by cutting. And the prohibition that we just described will not apply to any parcel in the agricultural residential zone greater than 1 acre in size, which caused me a little heartburn because we have a lot of residential areas that have, or residential neighborhoods that have lots of less than 1 acre. But we really couldn't come up with a good way to do that. So we're going to live with this for a little while and see what happens. It also doesn't apply to any single-family residential zoning classification that is greater than 3 acres. So we can have an RS-40 lot greater than 3 acres, and this restriction will not apply. It doesn't apply to forest regeneration areas or future forest areas. It doesn't apply to a parcel that is undeveloped. What is undeveloped? It's defined in a different section. It's undeveloped means a parcel which does not have any improvements such as a building, structure, or impervious surface and contains no more than 300 square feet of impervious area. That's an undeveloped parcel. Another important one was vegetation adjacent to structures. So a property owner shall clear structures, windows, doors, eaves, fascia, roof, utility meters, or exterior air conditioning units, and shall not obstruct or impede pedestrian or vehicular passage upon driveways, and have at least one pedestrian walkway serving the entrance door of a structure. Vegetation within natural landscapes shall not be permitted to encroach onto public or private properties. Managed landscapes shall not include turf, grass, lawns, or areas for the purpose of returning to natural state. So I hope that helped. I know it was long, but I think this is something that the public needs to understand. So that concludes my discussion.
Mr. Herod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was excited to see this come through because this issue of overgrown yards is probably the issue that I receive most correspondence on. What can we do about overgrown yards? And up until now, the answer has been not very much. But I do have so I'm excited to see this coming through because I do think it will help people who are unfortunate enough to live next door to people who don't maintain their property. But I do have 2 questions. So when speaking about managed natural landscapes, and I think this is probably for the attorney or maybe the manager, but if I understand it, if that's going to be an exemption, do you need to have a a permit to have a managed natural landscape, or in other words, can you just let your yard get overgrown, and then when the code enforcement comes by, you say, well, it's a managed natural landscape?
There are two responses to that. The first is that in the definition of the managed natural landscape, it has to be intentional, maintained, and cultivated. So, and then there's another provision later at the end that says managed natural landscape shall not include turf, grass, lawns, or areas left unattended for the purpose of returning to natural state. So there will be no permit, and the idea is the officer in the field is going to have to see that it's more than just somebody who's not cutting his yard anymore, that there's an effort to try to manage it and make it more like a landscape.
Okay, so from, I always like to think through what possible outcomes there may be. So let's assume that there's a complaint about a yard that is quote-unquote unkempt. Code enforcement comes by and says, yeah, this looks kind of like it's unkempt. They issue a citation, it goes to court. How do we prove that this is not a managed natural landscape?
Well, there are the purposes A through H, and I believe that the owner would have to articulate the reason for doing that as one of these purposes, and to show some intentional cultivation and maintenance rather than just not doing anything.
So that puts the burden of proof on the homeowner rather than on the prosecutor, but that seems to run counter to my understanding of American jurisprudence.
Well, and I believe this is more like a defense, that if an officer comes out there and let's say the property owner says, I'm not going to talk with you at all, I'm not going to say anything to you. And so the officer makes out a case that there's vegetation over 10 inches. That's called a prima facie case. And unless the landowner comes forward with some defense that this is a managed natural landscape, I think the court's going to find that it's a violation of the ordinance.
So you're comfortable from a legal point of view, as your office would be the one that would have to prosecute this, and you're comfortable that there is no wiggle room in here that we are opening up, that we shouldn't be opening up right now?
Well, when you're dealing with this topic, I believe there probably is always going to be a little bit of wiggle room. But the managed natural landscape concept has come out of a movement, a legal movement across the country, and this is from their model ordinance. So there has been some success in other communities with this concept. But I think you're right. I mean, people can come up with issues. They can make their case to the court of, well, this is a natural landscape, and I think we are going to have to work through that. But
well, I noticed that if this is passed, we'll come back and look at it again, I guess, in 12 months. The second issue that I had was, and again, I know the argument is always about, well, you've got to have our code enforcement people going around with tape measures measuring the length of people's grass, but 10 inches of overgrown grass seems like an awful lot of overgrown grass. And I don't know where that figure came from, but in some ways that doesn't really... I think yards look unkempt a lot more before you get 10 inches of grass on them. So I'm not sure that that's really going to help us very much, this figure.
Two things there. We looked at lots of different ordinances throughout the country, and they range from 6 to 12 inches. And so I think the committee felt like 10 inches was a good starting place. But the pictures, code enforcement brought in pictures of lots they've investigated before. And these lots were much higher than 10 inches. I mean, not uniformly 10 inches, but there was vegetation that was 12 to 14 inches scattered, say, throughout the front yard. So, and those weeds grow pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In rainy weather, I think there may have been more than 10 inches in my yard a few times. So, Mr.
I couldn't help but think, is this where the phrase "in the weeds" comes from? And thank you for not putting me on this committee, by the way.
Does anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring some topics forward that we talked about on the numerous times that we had this under discussion. And a lot of it is, too, that the code enforcement sees more than just one thing with this, and that's where the overgrown vegetation and vegetation that's leaving your property into the other one, as well as on the structures. So it ends up being really more of a collection of these rather than just the one turf height or weed height among the turf. So it's they seem to think that with the enforcement, having those different areas, not just the 10-inch height for that, was giving them what they were looking for in the gap of the compliance. And they also said that it's really, the warning tends to help on these things, and it is really just about getting people to comply, and sometimes just having that to be written up for them to comply solves it. And that's our hope, I think, is just the compliance of it rather than being in court about it.
Ms. Dickerson.
So I just had a question for the manager. How will we publicize this to the public, and will there be a, perhaps this is a attorney question, will there be a period of time we're going to just issue warnings like we talked about with like the electronic fence thing? I mean, how's that going to be handled?
We can talk with code enforcement and come up with a plan for letting folks know. And, you know, I will say this, you know, people think about tickets getting written, you know, code enforcement is all about compliance, and folks get a warning, basically, you know, a notice of citation if they can't correct it in 30 days. So if it's, people only go to court if they won't comply.
I have a quick question. This is a Bill question, probably. When you said undeveloped lots, if a lot has curbs and gutters and a cut for a driveway, is that a developed lot? I think of that as a developed lot.
We picked up the definition from the stormwater utility ordinance, and so that would require 300 square feet of impervious surface. So if it's truly a lot with nothing on it but a driveway cut, it would be an undeveloped lot.
What about the PVC farms where you've got, you know, numbers of lots with the white PVC sticking up? I mean, because those could be something that seems like it should fall into this.
And I think that's something the mayor and commission could decide to do. It's just, you know, if you had a large subdivision, code enforcement would have to track down the owner and try to get that, get the yard cut.
Because for those few houses that get built in those, when they're left like that, it's horrible. You know, so, okay. Do y'all want this on consent, or you want to keep talking about it some more?
I think it should go on consent.
Okay, consent, Jean. Okay, do you need to use the screen? Okay.
Slide your chair up, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, just push the chair up a little.
Yeah.
It's like good night story time.
I mean, I've got one of those off of Vincent Drive.
Oh, I don't. That's right. I'm sorry.
I was talking to him.
Keep him up. Get into that.
I had to think about this. It's been a while. I haven't been here since.
Yeah. So I'm ready when you are.
Okay, I am. We have three for you this evening. The first is a special use permit request at 1595 South Lumpkin Street. As you know, special use permits bring within binding reports and site plans if approved. This particular property is just a little over a quarter acre in size. It's an existing legal non-conforming commercial parking lot. Commercial parking lot in that the property on which the parking is located does not have a principal use assigned with it. It's just the parking. And they're proposing to expand that lot from 15 spaces to 23. There is the property. The primary access comes off of South Lumpkin Street between the convenience store on the corner and the strip retail center to the north. This is a proposed plan. Right now, there is about 15 angled parking spaces if you come in off Lumpkin that continue all the way down to about this point. The proposal is to remove those to provide the additional spaces in this configuration in an area right now that's really a mix of some old gravel and some grass and things. and then bring the overall parking lot into compliance with our design standards with regard to landscaping, trees, et cetera. Recommendation from the Planning Commission is to approve without conditions.
Bill, do you have anything to say about it?
No, I was still reading the information down here. No, ma'am.
It's in my district.
Oh, I'm
and
sorry, I
I
thought it
just
was
wanted to say that it's going to be nice to have it in compliance with the current expectations for parking lot, because that has been its primary use. And the alley comes back out also on Morton behind Waffle House over here. So it has two ways of coming to it and back out. By the main arrow is because those are angled for that way, but the other spots are not necessarily angled to have to be approached from that side.
Looks like it's going to be more attractive, too.
That is the current way to go into an angled parking spot versus backing into it. But these are all the traditional way.
Okay. Anybody got any questions or comments?
Madam Mayor, I did say that I did, when I was contacted about this, yes, I did say yes, that's fine.
Yeah. I'm sorry I gave
That's
it.
fine.
I'm giving things away to people that don't deserve them all night tonight. Yeah.
All right. That was the last one that will require the overhead. I have two proposed text amendments for you as well. The first is text amendment to our code section 925.8, which is design standards, primarily dealing with the introduction of certain types of metal siding that we would refer to generally as architectural metal as a permitted material under the design standards. Right now, our current design standards simply just place a restriction on metal, and that can be anywhere from the metal that I think all of us generally think of that is more of the barn siding, the exposed fasteners, the thinner gauge, up to, we actually rejected some copper architectural detailing on the Hyatt Place that's being proposed downtown under this same standard because copper technically is metal. I had no other option than to tell them that they would have to ask for a variance to use it. And so what we are recommending is a change. We did some research in other communities and are requesting that architectural metal be allowed if it has a gauge value of 24 or less, which means it's a thicker material, that it does not have any exposed fasteners, and then no more than 40% of any facade utilize that specific material. The second amendment you see on this proposed sheet is just a couple of clarifications under our requirement for transit amenities. Simply to make it a little clearer that ultimately the determination falls on our transit director or authorized designee as we move through plan review process with regard to transit access. So really that's just a clarification. What this was really about was to try to get the higher grade architectural metal into the ordinance as a permitted use. And that was with a unanimous vote from the Planning Commission, as was the first one. I forgot to point that out.
That's right.
Yeah. My question is this allowing more versatile choices that are in the market now,
Yes.
that are more high-end versus what was typically a Butler building type approach versus, like you're saying, the copper and then other sustainability, more sustainable choices?
What we're hearing from some of the architects that are doing this work is it is not a budgetary issue or trying to cut costs. In many cases, this architectural metal actually is more expensive at the installation point than many of the other materials they could use.
Okay, Ms. Dixon and Ms. Link.
Just a clarification, this is just facades, we're not talking about roofs, right?
This is just facades.
Okay.
Ms. Link.
I think this makes sense. I mean, I feel like this allows these architects to be more creative, and we want to see that. We want to see more creativity and more unique designs in these buildings. So I think this is a good move. And also the reference to future transit, that's I think is definitely needed. We have all these future plans, so we need to make sure that our buildings are going to meet the future plans.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just appreciate Brad and his staff bringing this forward. I told a designer who's working on a project in my district that ran into some challenges with this that we were going to have to examine our code text, which I think was written for a rational reason. So basically, you wouldn't have a metal-sided garden shed or a Butler-style building right up on the road, but didn't take into account that variety of materials that a lot of folks are looking for today. So I think this is great.
Further discussion? I have a quick question. When you're talking about gauge value, does it get thicker as it gets smaller,
Yes.
the numbers? Okay, I assume that's what it was, but yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Nobody else has some questions?
The next set of amendments is out of our tree ordinance. There are a couple of them here. The first is out of section 8715 under tree canopy cover, and this deals primarily with current language in our code that is pretty restrictive on where a tree must be placed in relationship to either the edge of curb or a right-of-way line in order for it to be calculated and counted as a street tree. We've had very little flexibility. It basically has to be within about 10 feet of the right-of-way in order for us to count it under that criteria. We feel like that we have lost some opportunities in past years because of that restriction in terms of the ability to either count trees that are a little further away from the right-of-way that are existing, but we cannot give them credit for them as a street tree because they're outside of that 10-foot area, or in the case where it may be a much better product in the end if we had the flexibility to allow the designer to back those trees up 30 feet off of a right-of-way in the case of a large front lawn and get them out from under a power line easement. We don't have that discretion right now. That's really what this is intending to build in, is it would allow the community forester or the arborist, whoever it falls under, given the project, the authority to make the determination to move the tree back if it turns out to be a better project. And then the second part of this amendment deals with forest management activities. This is the development limitation that we built into the tree ordinance upon its adoption. The original intent of it was to place a restriction or a limitation in the code that would severely impact somebody who tried to, in the name of a timber harvest or a forest management activity, eliminate all of their trees, which is a completely legal use on any property in the name of timber harvesting, but then to turn immediately around and bring in a development proposal on the same property and claim that they can't conserve any canopy because they don't have any to conserve. So there was a 5-year limitation placed on any properties over an acre in size. If you remove more than 5 trees without the proper permits, you're immediately put into that 5-year limitation, and the only ability to make it go away is to go to the hearings board, plead your case to them, and they can grant the relief necessary based on their determination. We started seeing several basically single family out in our more rural areas of the county where somebody may have a couple of acres, they're zoned agriculture or they're zoned RS40. They're getting ready to build a house, and so over a weekend they go in with a couple of friends and they remove 8 or 10 trees while they're cutting in a driveway on their property. They didn't know they had to get a timber harvest permit to do that. They're over the acre. They're automatically placed in a 5-year restriction and have to go before a hearings board, and it's an application process. And we felt like that there should be some consideration possibly given that, and it's only for, if somebody is only building one single-family house on their property, if they take down too many trees before they obtain their permits, once they're notified by us that there's a violation, if they can obtain all of those permits for the house for the purposes of the timber and the tree management within 60 days, then they are not subject to the 5-year restriction. I think the key word here is their ability to obtain the permits within the 60 days, because if they have removed too many trees on the property and they have fallen below whatever that required conserved canopy is based on their zone, they're not going to be able to obtain their permits, and so they will be in that 5-year. But in almost every case that we've seen with the single-family person that honestly didn't know, they're nowhere near going under their allowable canopy. They just, in some cases, it's been 6 or 7 trees that they've taken down, and it's been an extensive process for them to go through to simply be allowed to build their house on their property. So that is the second part of the 2 text amendments under community tree management. And that was a unanimous vote, too.
Any questions? Jerry?
Mr. Griffin, we had talked about the 30-foot tree frontage, 30 street trees every 30 feet?
Yes.
But that was in commercial zones. Is this applicable here? Is that what we're still talking about?
That's spacing between trees, and that has not been recommended for change at this point. It may be something coming forward at a
Because
later.
we had a problem in that the average was computed based upon the total frontage, but if there was a driveway or something else, then the average might be 30 feet, but the trees were actually planted 10 or 20 feet from one another.
Right.
So that, we haven't addressed
We
that
have
here?
not addressed that. This is a distance perpendicular off of a right-of-way or a property
I
line.
see. So we're not looking at the 30 foot. Would this be a good time to do that?
I mean, if it is, it's probably a little late in the cycle here to do it. We'd have to, well, we can't even send it back. You would have to deny it and then send it back for additional work to go back to the planning commission.
I see.
Because it's a text amendment, we don't have the authority to hold.
Gosh, I'm really sorry we missed this
Yeah.
opportunity. It's
Yeah, I mean-
something that we've had on our table for well over a year.
One of the real driving examples of this one, if any of you have been out in our industrial park, the Nakanishi expansion at Spring Valley and Voiles, you know, a huge front lawn that wraps all the way around. They were required to install street trees under our ordinance along the entire frontage. They ultimately were required to put in small canopy trees all the way along both frontages because they had to go underneath the power lines because that's where they were located. If we would have had the authority to just back them up 30 or 40 feet, we could have done much larger trees that would have had a much better long-term result. That's what was driving this. We probably should have caught that other one too.
Yeah, we really should have.
And that's
Because it's an
something we-
issue, in our suburban business corridors. This requirement for street trees 30 feet apart is where we have trees that are 10 feet apart or 20 feet apart, and perhaps we shouldn't even have street trees in those particular businesses at all. So maybe, Madam Mayor, we can have a discussion about this and decide what you might want to do. Thank you.
Sharon?
So how does this impact renovations to properties? I mean, you know the situation I had out in my district where there was a house and they decided to take down a lot of trees. Is there a canopy requirement for existing homes and renovations to homes? I mean, you know which one I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, does that impact at all? Do they have to go get a permit, or, I mean, how's that?
I mean, if they are on a property over an acre and they take down more than 5 trees, they have to first come in and obtain the proper paperwork and permits to remove those trees. And in the case of most of yours being in the AR zone, while they're still required to obtain the necessary permitting, there is no required conserved canopy in AR. A couple of the single families that we ended up having to put into 5-year restriction and they ultimately had to receive relief from our hearings board were in AR zone properties. They could have legally taken them all down and still gotten their permits. They just didn't get the permits before they took the trees down. So, but it would be the same way.
Isn't that kind of odd to be in the AR zone and not have a requirement there be a conserved canopy?
Largely based on dealing with agriculture was the reason for farmers.
Is this something we could talk about during the comp plan or not?
I mean, generally, the things from a comp, you could, but I mean, you know, most of what we're talking about in terms of addressing with the comp plan are really text amendments in the zoning ordinance. The comp plan may drive larger policy issues that will lead us to get here. So it could be, you know, to revisit our canopy calculations by zone in the tree ordinance. It's something that you could certainly, that could come out of the comprehensive plan.
I could cover what Jerry's concerned about in the same request to plan.
Well, may I?
Yes.
I don't think my agricultural constituents would want me to tell them they can't cut down trees so that they can plant corn. So I can't do that in the AR zone. I just can't do it. Now, I know we have residences in the AR zone, and that's a problem in many ways. But we can't do it by simply saying that we have a tree canopy requirement in the AR zone. So just to let you know.
Anybody else have any comments on this one? Or we can go home, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're ready.